Guten Tag, I guess, in German, or good day to all our beautiful listeners for the Tatiana show. Today, sadly, without the most talented Tatiana Morose, she is feeling a little bit under the weather, so we've had to do the show ourselves. But I am joined by none other than Erik Voorhees, a royalty in the Bitcoin and blockchain space. And when I say royalty, it's even better than royalty because you actually have to earn that to get that that sort of title in this space. You aren't just born into it. And Eric's, had some amazing projects throughout the years, all focused on freedom, on the philosophy, based on the philosophies of freedom and dare I say it, anarchy in the space. It's really been a big move forward, actually, in the concepts and philosophies of anarchy, having these blockchains. And Eric's business models have always been to truly get away from fiat and push towards this, which I've always really enjoyed. Erik Voorhees, thank you very much for coming on the show with us today and sharing your insights.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me on the show.
Yeah, so let's just start from the very beginning. Where did you come from? Some of the first footage that I remember seeing you on, you were a kid back when you first started becoming an entrepreneur, right?
It was it was about 5 years ago that I got involved in Bitcoin, so was no longer a kid at that point, but I guess I was pretty young. Now I'm sort of like a Bitcoin elder. It was just one of those things that came across my path and clicked on a Facebook link, read an article, and suddenly something that was going to be 10 minutes of reading an article turned into changing my entire life and everything that I do. So it's been quite a ride so far, and it's still, every day feels like things are just getting started.
It's true, isn't it? Back in the day, I used to read, pretty much feel like I could keep up with everything in the space. And nowadays, this DAO happened, and I only found out about it near the end of, like, it already raised, 100 and whatever million. And I was like, what? Who now?
It used to be exciting when a Bitcoin company would raise $1 million in venture funding, and now a decentralized autonomous robot in the sky raised 160 million without a lot of people in the industry even knowing about it.
It really is amazing. It's phenomenal, and the whole concept of the DAO, of a DAO, I should say, a decentralized autonomous organization, is for me just as exciting as Bitcoin itself at the time, because you have the potential for a whole new ism almost. Because it's sort of this mixture of capitalism and socialist philosophy where you can have people owning the business through direct ownership and no real boss. And so you've got these sort of concepts, but you've also got the ideas of free market in there, and it really is a new beast. It's amazing.
Yeah, another way to think of it is that it's not really a combination of free markets and anything else. It is just purely free markets. It's the first time that people have been able to interact with each other economically without any gatekeepers standing in the way. And that looks very new because we haven't really ever had it. There's always a regulation or a border or a rule or a control of some kind preventing people from creating interesting relationships like this. And the whole world of crypto has given people tools to get around that completely. Bitcoin doing so for money. And once you do it for money, you can start doing it for other types of human activity, like this fund, the DAO, which is sort of a decentralized venture capital fund. And it's very cool to see. I can't imagine what's going to come of it, but it's going to be very interesting, and it's not going to be the last one.
No, in fact, I've heard some people are a bit peeved because they called it the Dow, and the big.
Yeah, I think that wasn't a great choice of name.
Yeah, because people really feel like it's such an important concept, and just to sort of cyber squat it like that was a bit annoying. But
Yeah,
anyway,
it'd
I've
be like
already
if Bitcoin was called the digital currency.
yeah, exactly.
People want to talk about digital currency. Well, are you talking about the digital currency or in general?
Yeah, and you always have to give that extra explanation.
Maybe we could submit a proposal to the DAO because that's what happens to change the name.
Well, there you go.
There you
See,
go.
it's already winning. Yeah, every day when I wake up and I see some of these concepts, and I imagine what it could be in the future, and we're really seeing the Dow raising 160 million. It doesn't even have an interface. It didn't really even know what it can do, and everyone's just pushing money into this. It's beautiful to see, and it'll be really interesting to see if what happens if it splits, or if it starts investing in illegal activity or legal activity, or what, how will the crowd decide? And also, can voters that don't really have a clue about a certain subject but have voting rights, will that mess it up?
Well, that sounds like democracy in general.
Yeah.
All the issues of government, most people have no clue about, and yet they have their vote.
Yeah.
The difference here, of course, is in the DAO, you can get out of it. You can leave and opt out if it's not going in the right direction. So it always has sort of a feedback loop to keep it in check. Unlike government, where everyone gets to vote and everyone's stuck in the community that's being voted on.
But if you don't like it, leave. That's what they always say. It's just
Yeah, you can vote. You can join another community of the same exact thing with people voting foolishly.
well, and this is one thing that I really love about Bitcoin, and I've said it before on the show. I feel that in the past, if you have an economic theory, you would have to force a group of people in a
Mhm.
geographical area to adopt that theory and see if it works. And the force usually turns to gulags and nightmares, and lots of human suffering. But
Yeah.
with cryptocurrency, you can just say, oh, well, let's try a demurrage coin that loses value over time so people spend it more. Let's
Mhm.
try that. Boom. And then it fails, or it explodes and goes up in value. And, it's just, there's nothing more beautiful than a voluntary interaction, especially a voluntary economic interaction.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of economic theories, now that we have a digital currency that is both private but also trackable, and so it creates tons of interesting data about how it's used, will really inform, I think, the uh, the whole economic school, because people can actually see how money moves now in a way that has never really been possible. It's economic statistics have often largely been proxies, like guesses and estimates of things based on surveys or small sample sizes. But now with digital assets, you can actually watch how economic activity flows through a group of people, and that has to be a good thing.
Absolutely. And you see that in practice, where a government will say, well, this is the rate of inflation. Believe us.
Yeah, they have no idea.
They have no idea. And,
They have
and
no idea.
I,
They don't even
meantime,
use the term correctly. They're talking about price increases as if that was inflation.
right, right. And when they do mention it like that, in just general price increase, you have so many different variables in that. So, for instance, the price of oil is very global, and they'll
Mhm.
start talking about the price of oil in a certain geographical area, saying, well, the price of oil has done this and that, so our inflation rate isn't that bad or
That's
whatever.
that's a very good point. Is that a lot of inflation metrics come from the price increases of global commodities, which trade on global markets and have the same price around the world, and so they're going to be very much they're not a reflection, really, not a good reflection of any one specific country. And so
Hmm.
to include those in an inflation statistic immediately distorts the true picture.
Absolutely, and not only that, you get total manipulation if it's if a certain thing like oil is subsidized by the state, or corn or whatever. Um,
Yeah.
And but I think, what I've always said to people is try to keep a little diary of how much things cost at the supermarket, in terms of a bunch of,
Yeah.
once every 2 years, buy the same group of things and just see for yourself.
Yeah. That's a
But
dangerous idea. I don't think the government would want people doing that.
it's a funny, yeah. I mean, when you put ideas of how people can actually open their eyes into people's heads, you can to educate them is really one of the first steps into gaining traction for things that better society. But a lot of the time, and that's why I think we see a lot of push towards schooling from states, that they don't want you to be too logical thinking. They would rather have you repeating stuff really well and not actually questioning.
Saluting the flag. In the U.S. at least, American students salute the flag. They pledge allegiance to this government every morning as like the start of their day.
Do they really?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I did. I did it when I was little. When I was a little kid, we would go into school. We would have our Pledge of Allegiance, and we all put our hands over our hearts and said the incantations of the U.S. government. And that was very normal and natural. And so, if anyone didn't do that, like they would be seen as very weird and strange, and what the hell's wrong with them? And it wasn't until I got older that I looked back on that ritual and realized how disturbing and just like Nazi-esque it was. To see little children like saluting a government and swearing allegiance long before the age of consent or majority or anything like that. The whole thing is just very creepy. So
it is very creepy. You're right. Erik, your projects have always been very ahead of their time, even in the Bitcoin space, in my opinion. We had
sometimes in business it's not good to be ahead of your time. That can be a euphemism for you just failed.
I've actually experienced that a couple of times too. But luckily yours were just on the perfect cusp of ahead of their time. And like SatoshiDICE for me, how did you even come up with the idea of SatoshiDICE? Because technically it was extremely advanced, not, because you were firing back answers before a block was verified. Mm-hmm. I guess we step back a bit and maybe you could explain to the audience what it was.
So the sort of prototype idea was not mine. It was some programmer had basically made this spreadsheet and had all these different addresses with different odds. And if you sent Bitcoin to the addresses, it would do a calculation and send funds back if you won or lost. And it was pretty literally just this spreadsheet. And he said, like, I made this cool little thing. He posted on Reddit about it. He said, look at this thing I made. Does anyone want to like take it over or turn it into a business or something? And I tried it, and I felt the magic of it. And it was back in 2012. When there was not a lot of uses of Bitcoin at all, and I realized that like this demonstrated a brand new way of interacting with a very old form of entertainment, of gambling, and it was so easy to do it, and it was so easy to just send the funds and then receive them back, no accounts, and the whole thing was provably verifiable, so you didn't have to trust the creator. It was just very elegant and innovative, and it just captivated me immediately. And so I bought it from him. I hired him as my head developer at first, and so we turned it into SatoshiDICE. And it was just sort of a little side project at first, but it really took off. And I think it's because it was just at the perfect time. It was right when like people were starting to get into Bitcoin. It was super easy. They discovered like this demonstrated a use of Bitcoin that could not be done with normal fiat. You could not have this game or this mechanism with fiat, with credit cards, with bank transfers. It just couldn't be done. And so this demonstrated Bitcoin as a useful new tool, and I think a lot of people fell in love with it, and it just kind of exploded.
Yeah, in fact, it probably coined the first concept of transaction spam, which was never really even an idea. And I mean, I don't think there is such thing as transaction spam. I think if someone's sending something, it just is. I mean, I guess there is, but I think it's more of an intent rather than the concept of transactions.
Well, I mean,
based on intent.
There's definitely the concept of spam in transactions. Like someone could just send out transactions onto the network with the intention of causing congestion or messing up other people's transactions or something.
Right.
That's legitimate spam. SatoshiDICE wasn't anything like that. It was people that were gambling with their own money and then receiving a payment back.
Yeah.
People called it spam because it at one point was more than half of all the Bitcoin transactions that were happening on Earth, and that I think kind of overwhelmed some people, and they thought that's not okay to be using more than half of all the transactions, not realizing that like Bitcoin's value is the extent to which it is found uses for. And if the whole system can't even handle one gambling game, then we should just pack up and go home because it's kind of pointless anyway. But I think just the volume of use and seeing people use something that hadn't been used more than just occasionally for a novel purchase of alpaca socks, when that flood of actual use for an economically useful purpose came through, I think it just blew some people away, and they couldn't handle it, and they felt like it was wrong.
Yeah, absolutely, and that that concept of intention rather than what's happening. So the intention behind a spam attack would be to slow the whole network down or try to crush it or stress test the network. But it was a phenomenal amount of transactions. I think the other thing that I really loved about SatoshiDICE was, and you touched on it before, was the concept of provably fair.
Yeah.
Is that something that you guys invented, or where did that come from?
So I don't think SatoshiDICE can technically claim to have invented provably fair, but it certainly did popularize it in a way that had never been done before. And now, if you go to any Bitcoin gambling site, they all have to be provably fair. Everyone will leave if it's not, and it's become a requirement. I believe it will become a requirement in normal casinos. So when you go to the floor of a Vegas casino, when you put your money in a slot machine, you have no idea. You don't even know what the odds are claimed to be. It doesn't show what the odds are. And even if it did show what the odds are, you don't know if they're lying to you. They totally could be. The only trust you're able to have is that some gang called the Nevada Gaming Commission has put a sticker on it saying that they've approved it. And I'm sure there's no corruption there, and I'm sure there's no way to get around their sticker.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something that I think is a really interesting concept, and this is what free markets for me is so are really so beautiful, because if you have something that is obviously better, generally people will go towards it. So provably fair is just better for the user. And
think so gambling is a very old game. Vegas has been around for 100 years, and in all that time, with all the government regulation, never once was there any move toward something that was provably fair. You had the anointing of the government bureaucrat on your game, and that was considered safe, and that's how it's been forever. And it would be like that for another 100 years if it weren't for people being allowed to innovate. And the irony, of course, is that a lot of the games in the Bitcoin world are gray area legally. A lot of them are not licensed by any of these gangs, and yet they're the ones that have done more to protect the actual players and make innovations that keep people safe and keep the game fair and honest and transparent than the regulators ever did in 100 years.
Yeah, it's very, very true, and I start to see the fact that in the Bitcoin space, it's really highlighted the fact that that regulations are really there, written by the incumbents for the incumbents to basically protect the incumbents from amazing startups that are really pushing the boundaries and protecting. I mean, you said it there yourself. the fact that a regulator has never pushed for provably fair or a mathematically provable way of confirming before a bet has been put on the table, that you can then, after the fact, check if that was a totally random sequence is quite ludicrous. But again, what would have happened is, well, the regulators have basically protected a small group of people in the industry from having too much competition.
There's certainly some of that. I mean, there's some of that sort of corruption side of things. Regulatory capture, I guess, is the term for it.
Yeah.
But I think largely I give the benefit of the doubt to regulators. I think they generally try to help people. I think they usually are not trying to help incumbents, even though that's what they end up doing often.
Yeah.
And I think they're trying to be good. The problem is that intentions don't matter nearly as much as results. And I think a lot of people in government have great intentions, but without the feedback mechanism of the marketplace and without that intense competitive pressure, you do not get the kind of innovation. And that's why Bitcoin, having opened up this brand new realm of free market activity where people are free to interact with each other, is so wonderful.
Yeah, and I see it also that the Bitcoin space is innovating so much in terms of transparency as well. There's the blockchain allows for us to have ultimate transparency while still keeping the users private, which is a really large move. And I think just as things like provably fair have pushed consumer protection in that sense, I think Bitcoin is pushing in the large financial sector. Eventually, they will have to become a lot more transparent, like what we've done.
Provably solvent. That's something that a lot of wallets have been doing. Does Vaultoro do that? Do you guys have?
Yeah. We have a full. We call it the Glass Books protocol, where we give everyone. Thank you. And it's it's so important, and I've given talks about how important transparency is, especially in people that are holding your private keys, which is one thing that I really love about ShapeShift, is that you just don't, and you don't need an account and stuff like that. It's really, again, and I think this is the philosophy of SatoshiDICE as well. It's like, just go for it.
It was done in the same way to basically build something that was safer by design. So you have normal exchanges that have been regulated forever. They all hold customer funds, and they're all like moderately safe in some ways, but there's still that huge risk that something could go bad with all that money. It doesn't matter how many regulations you place on those people.
Yeah.
ShapeShift built an exchange that doesn't hold any customer money, so it doesn't matter if the operators become corrupt or if a hacker breaks in and steals a bunch of funds, because there's no customer money to take in the first place. So it's consumer protection by design as opposed to fake consumer protection by decree.
Yeah, that's great. And with what we're doing with Vaultoro is kind of similar in terms of gold, that if we go broke, gold is owned by the user in their name as their property. So it doesn't matter. Even liquidators of Vaultoro wouldn't be able to touch clients' gold. Whereas with a bank, it's not your property anymore. They can just gamble with it. They do whatever, and then when they go broke, they just go, oh, well, we're closing the door and going to take a haircut.
Well, worse than that, yeah, they'll take more of your money in the form of tax bailouts.
Yeah, and then just that for fun, just to put some
so your loss is not limited to the amount of money that you have.
That's right. There's nothing better than icing on a turd cake like that. Yeah, it's. But so what's next? One thing that I really wanted to give a shout out to was your efforts with the pleaseprotectconsumers.org website. That was something once the New York license came out. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So New York State, feeling itself to be the regulator of the universe, led the charge in creating the first Bitcoin-specific regulation. It was known as the Bit License, created by Benjamin Losky. He was the superintendent of the New York Department of Financial Services. I say was because right after unleashing this monstrosity onto the world, he left and went to go work in the private sector. So his legacy remains. But anyway, this bit license is essentially written to force Bitcoin companies to act like banks. Part of that is because probably they had pressure from banks to prevent this kind of innovation from happening. And part of that is because this regulator has regulated banks for 100 years, and that's all they know how to do. And whatever they see, if it looks like a bank, they're going to slap a bank sticker on it and regulate it as such. So even the application for this thing was 40 pages of all sorts of ridiculous questions. You had to get background checks on investors and every stakeholder in the company, and divulge private financial information about anyone involved. And it was 40 pages of this nonsense. I think a finished application probably is in the 100 to 200 page range, just to get permission to run a Bitcoin startup. And one of its worst requirements was that it required that if you're involved in Bitcoin activity, you have to take personal private information from your users and store it and share it with the New York government. Obviously, every bank does this, but Bitcoin, one of its great virtues is that you don't need to surrender personal private information to go about your business. And the loss of private financial and personal information has allowed this huge criminal enterprise of identity theft, which is a $50 billion a year problem in the U.S. Which is there's more value lost from identity theft every year in the U.S. than from all other forms of property theft combined. So home burglary, auto theft, all that stuff doesn't add up together to how much is lost from identity theft.
That's an amazing statistic.
It's crazy, yeah. And we have that problem because every time you make a payment online, you're putting your personal private information with that merchant, and then that merchant's sharing it either with the government or with other merchants. And you just get this whole terribly inefficient system, which admittedly was necessary when the payment methods were credit cards, because you needed to know who the person was to prevent fraud, because credit cards are so insecure.
The pull technology.
Yeah, with this pull technology. With Bitcoin, you don't need to worry about that. And so why do you need to know someone's personal information in order to do business with them? You don't. And asking for it is not only unnecessary, it is reckless and dangerous and puts them in harm's way. So since the bit license required that we endanger users, we had a sort of a moral question, like, are we going to endanger users all over the world just because this guy in New York wants to say that we need to? It was not right. So we blocked New York as a service. We put up a page called pleaseprotectconsumers.org explaining why we did that. We invited other people to sort of do the same, and there's a bunch of companies on that page that have left New York, and many others that we haven't listed,
including us,
including you guys, right? Because you care about users as well.
Yeah, I mean we kind of went with the when you sign up, it says you're not allowed. I confirm that I'm not a citizen of Syria, North Korea, Iran, or
which itself is crazy. Like, why can't a citizen of North Korea or Iran engage with the world just because they have a maniac government doing crazy stuff?
Absolutely. I remember when I first found out about Bitcoin. It was long, and I found some guy in Iran was a musician. He'd made some little song. It was amazing. It was just a really nice track, and I said, hey, can I buy that? And I sent him some Bitcoin, and then he sent me the MP3, and it was the first time where it was sort of this light bulb that went, wow, like, whoa, here's a person that cannot at all accept my money through PayPal, Visa, anything else. And there I was. I sent him 50 cents or whatever it was at the time, and I had the MP3, and it was just this notion of, he's just an artist guy. He has got nothing to do with anything the government has to do with. He's sitting there in his basement, his mum's basement, making cool music, and wants to live peacefully like everyone else. So that was a real eye opener.
And just like, imagine the ability for propaganda that those kind of restrictions allow those bad governments to bestow on their people, right? So if the U.S. is blocking all economic activity into or out of Iran, what do you think the Iran government is going to be telling its people about why they can't do anything outside of the borders? It's because the big bad U.S. American government is pouncing down on you. That kind of thing, if you grow up in that environment, you're going to grow up completely hating the U.S., and it's totally understandable why those kind of people can become radicalized.
Absolutely. I mean, sanctions are really atrocious they really cause a lot of death, a lot of human suffering, a lot of suffering in general. Going back to the pleaseprotectconsumers.org, check it out, folks, and pass that around, because it is a really good service. You know, we have these policies in place where imagine if you went to a supermarket, and every time you went to the supermarket and bought something, you had to show your ID and and all this other stuff. Could you imagine how fast everybody's ID would be stolen? I mean, it would just be ridiculous, and that's why we have laws, like in the European Union, you're allowed to buy $7,500 worth of a good a day without pulling down your pants and showing everything. And you know, and so it's and those laws are there for a very good reason. That it's come down from 15,000 because that was thought to be too much. It's now at 7,500, and the reason is because society would come to a literal halt in terms of markets, because if every time you had to show your ID, it would just be gone. It would disappear so quickly, and someone would have your identity. And the thing with non-blockchain identities is that the identity is attached to the human, attached to the actual living person, which cannot ever be wiped. You can't ever just start again.
Right. If your identity gets stolen, you can't reset your identity.
Oh man, and a friend of mine had his
PGP keys or something.
Yeah, not like a GP. Exactly, a private key. You can say, right, I've got this key, and you know, someone's stolen it. Okay, well, you know, broadcast that it's been stolen. A, and B, let's make a new one. But you know, if we look at the concept of identity theft, a friend of mine had his identity stolen, and it took him literally, I think it was 9 or 10 years to start to get back to zero. The people took out loans, took out credit cards, all sorts of stuff in his name. He had the burden of proof to prove that it wasn't him.
Right.
And it was a really he basically couldn't get a new electric bill. He couldn't get a new phone bill because they would just say, no, you've got a bad credit rating.
Yeah, and then Ben Lasky wants to endanger everyone.
Yep.
And his justification for that piece of regulation was protecting consumers.
Yeah.
Like that. It's just total hypocrisy and nonsense, and I think he doesn't realize how bad that piece of legislation is, and how dangerous it is to people, and how much it goes contrary to the things that he claims he cares about.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was really this protectionist regulatory capture deal going on there, and especially after he leaves, he gets a job consulting companies on how to get a bit license. So it seems very conflict of interest.
He builds a maze, and then he leaves and goes to the front of the maze and says, "Hey, I can help you navigate financial regulation." He works in the private sector now. I'm sure he's making big bucks working consulting for companies that are trying to navigate regulations. And somehow this is acceptable in America. I mean, that sounds like something that would happen in Soviet Russia, right? Like, something that Americans should laugh about as what the socialist, communist Russians do. But in allegedly free market America, that's par for the course.
Yeah, it's ludicrous. It's the perfect crime. So ShapeShift, what's happening there? What are your plans for the future? It's such an exciting company. I really, you know, when you first came out with ShapeShift, and it first came out, it was you behind it. It was this big sort of, hey, it's Erik Voorhees. And it was like, wow, because at that time, everyone was living in this Bitcoin maximalist world where altcoins were a bad word, and just pump and dumps and all the rest
Well,
of it?
and to be fair, most of them were that. Most
Yeah.
of the altcoins were either completely stupid ideas or explicit pump and dumps. Most of them were not worth any attention at all. So I can understand why a lot of people for a long time felt like Bitcoin is the one true digital asset and everything else is a scam. But that wasn't how the future was going to unfold. The technology that allows tokenization of value and assets to be tracked over a blockchain is going to have immense consequences and ramifications, and all sorts of interesting digital assets are going to be created. And so as I came to realize that, I realized that like ShapeShift is essential. There has to be an easy way to just snap your fingers and convert between any two digital assets without any friction at all. So that's what we were doing, and I think we've been vindicated to some degree because the rise of Ethereum, other tokens that are coming out. I mean, when Augur launches, Augur is going to be huge, and these are things that don't necessarily just directly compete with Bitcoin, but they add new functionality, and they do things differently in a way that will be very complementary to Bitcoin. So I'm hoping that more and more people start to understand that it's the importance is the ecosystem, not just one of the assets in it.
Yeah, absolutely. And folks, before I forget, I wanted to plug the blockchain training conference. Some amazing names are going to be there up in Toronto on June the 20th to the 21st. We've got Andreas Antonopoulos, of course, and a few people that we've had on the show, Lisa Chang, Pamela Morgan, Peter Todd's going to be there. And so it looks like a very, very interesting event over in Toronto. So get your boots on and head over that way.
Yeah, I highly recommend that event. I would be there, but I have a wedding to go to. But I know the people who are organizing that, and it's really good. So I highly recommend it.
I like the idea of training because there's so much misconceptions about blockchains. It's like you go to some events now and you talk about Bitcoin, they're like, Bitcoin, blockchain. And so yeah, they just sort of turn the blockchain, which you know is fine and all. And I think, but I do think there's a lot of confusion where people just say, oh yeah, blockchain technology, and they just say that word and then everything's amazing, and they don't actually understand what it means or how to define that.
Yeah, well, I tell a lot of people that blockchain is sort of the term that large financial companies can use in polite company without discussion devolving into one of monetary philosophy, which is inevitable if you start talking about Bitcoin.
Right.
And so blockchain just became this word that allowed people to talk about the technology without talking about like a competing currency of the U.S. government, because that gets real contentious real quickly.
It's interesting, isn't it? It's really interesting, and I think you've hit the nail on the head there, because you know, it's been illegal to mint your own currency for a very long time, and you know, I remember even thinking as a child, why can't I make my own currency and just try to compete? But it's been illegal and extremely illegal. We saw companies like eGold get shut down because of that, and so you see how when something's illegal, how it really changes people's their emotional attachment to it. And you say something like Bitcoin, or even if you say this, and I've tried to say to someone, a local business, hey, have you heard of Bitcoin? And sort of talking about it, and then they'll get angry at me and say, oh, I can't pay rent with that, go away. I was like, whoa, you know, really intense emotion, because you're talking about a currency that's not attached to the dollar. And so yeah, it's amazing. It's really
I think it bothers people on a very fundamental level when they've grown up knowing and feeling and learning that money is dollars. If you're an American, you learn that money is dollars. Dollars are money. They are synonymous. One is the other. Government is in charge of money. It should be in charge of money, and everything you do is sort of managed by the government. And thank goodness that they're there to bestow money on us, because without the government, we wouldn't even be able to transact, right? Like I wouldn't be able to buy anything from the store if I didn't have money, and money comes from the government. Yeah. So when you then show them that money is just a general commodity that can compete in the marketplace and that should compete in the marketplace, and that there might be forms of money that are better than the U.S. dollar. I think that really challenges people's fundamental beliefs about the order of the world, not really on a conscious level, like they don't think about it that way, but it just really gets to them, and I think that's why you often get sort of this emotional reaction, and why for so long in the Bitcoin industry people just could not accept that like a new form of money was even desirable. Like a lot of people didn't even want there to be competition in money, because why would you even want that? It's just like a scary new thing.
It's funny, isn't it? Because we find monopolies abhorrent in every other part of society apart from money. We're like, oh, no, money needs to have a monopoly in this geographical area, and that's the way it is.
Yeah, the most important, so most people understand the danger of monopoly, and they understand that you wouldn't want a monopoly food provider or a monopoly internet provider or a monopoly shoemaker. And the most important good of all is money. It is more popular than any other good. Everyone needs some of it. That most important good, for some reason, is just relinquished to the government as a monopoly, and everyone assumes that in that case it's okay for there to be a monopoly. And it's totally absurd.
It's absurd, isn't it? And you know, we're seeing now with Bitcoin how competition really, as the Australians would say, keeps the bastards honest. And because once you have competition and they start overprinting or playing silly games with the currency, you as an individual can exit. You as an individual can say, you know what, this is looking, I might start hedging or diversifying into something a little bit more maybe safer, and that then allows the state to go, well, we better stop doing this, otherwise we could lose total control of this, which
hopefully it'll have that effect. I mean, imagine if you were in Venezuela 5 years ago and you started learning about Bitcoin back when I did, and you saw how things were going in that country, and you said, okay, I'm going to start putting like a little bit of my money into Bitcoin. You know, not necessarily all of it, but I want to start hedging with an asset that is outside of the influence of this government. Your family would be eating right now, and you probably would have been able to escape Venezuela, whereas your neighbors are fighting in the streets for medicine and food. So it's not just a theoretical, you know, Bitcoin's better because it sends faster around the world and you save 2%. Like for a lot of people in the world, it can mean the difference in how their entire lives play out, to have an honest form of money.
Well, yeah, well said. Absolutely. The concept of the Venezuelans as well, it's and what's happening there is really what I've also said to a few people, that when you have a competition, it means that it's not just some funny little fun thing that you can do with Bitcoin and unlock locks with colored coins and all this stuff, but really literally it's the difference between starvation and not in some of these countries. But if we take it back a little bit, is there a way that we could have done this without digital currency? Is there a way we could have had true competition in a way that without, you know, having mobile wallets that can do instant conversion and stuff like that? I'm not sure.
Well, I mean, there's always been gold, which has always technically been able to compete with fiat as money. It has some sort of legal disadvantages from legal tender laws and things like that. But also just as a metal, it's very hard for like practical day-to-day transfer and usage at a store. And I think that practicality always weighed very heavily on its use as a normal money, and it became much more a form of storing value because it works very well for that, but not a way for day-to-day transactions. And in a global digital economy like we have now, for there to be a means of exchange that is competitive in the marketplace, I think it has to be digital also. You have to be able to transfer it to any person on Earth because you're buying products and services from any person on Earth. You don't want to have to ship it in the mail or handle something that's more analog. But certainly, I wish people realized that dollars and fiat were already digital currencies. I think that's been one of the amazing things about Bitcoin is that they think that digital currency is now new, but dollars are digital. Dollars have been a digital currency since banks started recording them in their computers. They are no more real than Bitcoin, and in fact, the only difference between Bitcoin and dollars is that one can be created out of thin air and the other can't. But both of them are very much digital.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's interesting with the thing that you were saying about gold is that it's really hard to move, and it's so true. And we just had this actually. Someone in the States requested physical delivery, and of their metals that's sitting in the Prorum Swiss vaults there that we use, and there would have been literally 3 months of paperwork and back and forth to get it through U.S. Customs. It would have taken so long to get 100 grams over there. So we decided to send the bullion to the professional bullion markets, sell it for Bitcoin, and send the Bitcoin over to Roberts & Roberts in America, who shipped it locally. And yeah, I mean, it's not the exact same gold that's in the vault, but gold is gold. It's a base metal. And that's what Bitcoin is beautiful at, sending that value. It happens so quick and so beautifully.
Yeah,
it was
without care for any border.
Yeah, it didn't matter. It didn't matter at all. And, that really showcased the power. And I often say it's very similar to how we had TCP/IP taking over from voice calls. I remember when I was a kid calling Germany, it would be like, hello, hello, hello. Everything would echo, and because you would be actually making phone calls to multiple exchanges all around the world that didn't have trusted, that had a trust relationship. And so you would jump through 15, 20 different exchanges, all charging something, until one day someone thought, you know what, I'm going to make a local call, convert it to IP, send it to Germany, make another local call. So now you're just paying for two local calls.
That's a very good analogy, yeah.
Yeah, and I see Bitcoin being very, very similar. You jump into it, send it, jump back out if you want to.
And it took VoIP a while to catch on. I mean, it was around for a while in a state that people could use it, but it wasn't very practical. Then Skype came out and it started getting popular, but it took at least 10 years for it to become popularized, and now it's very ubiquitous. Everyone uses it. This call right now is over VoIP. Yeah. So these things just take time to change how people behave, but at some point you look back and you realize that a whole bunch of stuff changed and you didn't even realize it was happening.
I mean, and that was 10 years, right? And that doesn't have any of the emotional stuff we were talking about that money does.
Right.
People are extremely attached, so I think it could take a little bit longer, even with money.
I think so too. Yeah. I don't expect digital currencies to be in wide use for 5 to 10 years from now, and that'll be okay because it exists now, and wherever financial crises happen, there now is an alternative.
Well, yeah, and I don't think Bitcoin is ready to go mainstream yet because it just can't scale yet, and everyone's working on it. It's happening, but it'll take a while, and I think that's just part of this discovery phase as we're inventing this technology as we go along. Mm-hmm. I said to someone the other day, it really couldn't have come along at a better time. Currency was becoming digital. I mean, as you mentioned, it already was, the US dollar and all this stuff, but more and more on the consumer-facing side, we were going to end up, everything was going to be mobile, everything is going to be digital, and that's when a huge nightmare could have happened. If the only way to do money was totally controlled, totally tracked, totally traced, totally, you're switched off now. Because
if there was no cash option, and everything was done on your mobile phone with normal fiat bank transfers, with Apple Pay and PayPal, you live in a world where every asset that you own and every transfer and purchase you make is tracked and monitored by the government. Like there's nothing more Orwellian than that, and sadly, a lot of people accept that as okay. Fortunately enough, people are very skeptical of that, and fortunately, there is an alternative now, so that people who care about not being surveilled in their entirety by a bunch of politicians thousands of miles away, they have something else they can use.
Absolutely, and not only surveilled, totally controlled. I mean, it's a single digit in an SQL database to say, right, you had $500, and now you've got 20,
Yeah.
and now you don't know, And so, yeah, having this decentralized digital cash, because at the end of the day, digital money is just way better than cash, because it's transferable worldwide, plus smart contracts and all the big Pandora's box that it opens up. So yeah, having a decentralized version was just the perfect timing. Thank you so much, Satoshi.
Yeah, he did good.
Yeah. So and what's if there are any plans for ShapeShift moving forward?
Yeah, we have big plans that we're not quite ready to announce. I'm very antsy because whenever I talk to people, I want to start talking about it, but we're not quite ready to discuss it. But yeah, I mean, we think digital asset exchange is going to be a $100 billion market very soon, and so we're trying to build as fast as we can to prepare for that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, the explosion in smart contracts, the explosion in DAOs, I see coming, and people wanting to exchange between them is a huge opportunity. How do you decide on an altcoin?
So typically we don't put much thought into it. We have typically watched the markets. We see which coins start to get decent trade volume. $5,000 a day is like a pretty bare minimum. Better if it's at least $20,000 a day, and even that's pretty small.
Yep.
If it achieves that level and we get some requests for it, and it looks like people are interested in it, we'll add it to the site. Some assets are easier than others, so we might add a less important asset that's easier to add versus a more important one that takes a lot more work. So that has some factor in it. But it's very, like, from our business perspective, it's very much a long tail distribution. So the vast majority of our volume is between the large coins, Bitcoin, Ethereum, Litecoin, Dash, and then everything else is very staggered and small. And so it's often hard to justify some of these coins because they're just so tiny. But at the same time, things start tiny and then become large. And sometimes these coins sneak up on us. We don't realize they're even popular until they're already out there trading. So it's been tough to watch. I mean, there's a lot of complexity to it, and it's hard to follow even for us.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing. Every so often, I'll look, and all of a sudden there'll be some math, like I was saying before, the DAO, just boom, and I feel like I've got my finger on the pulse, but I obviously don't, because the ecosystem's so large now that quite a large group of people can be doing something without anyone noticing, and it having a nice grassroots movement behind it.
Yeah, one unfortunate factor in that is that the community has really fractured along asset lines. So a lot of people don't really see it as a cryptocurrency or blockchain industry. They see like Bitcoin and they go to the Bitcoin Reddit and they pay attention to Bitcoin, or they are all into Ethereum and they pay attention to the Ethereum Reddit. And in reality, like, there should be a place where the whole industry meets and discusses things, because there's big news happening in all these assets, and it's important that people don't just like isolate themselves within one group or one room, because that destroys the network effect that the technology has.
Absolutely. It would be nice to see that, and I think Reddit's kind of good because you can subscribe to a couple of subreddits, but it also has its problems. Steam.io is really an interesting version of that. It's like a decentralized Reddit. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's starting to get some traction. We're watching it. We'll probably have to add that token to our site soon to ShapeShift.
Yeah, right. Also, CoinCap. That's another product of ShapeShift.io. A very, very useful product. Tell us about it.
CoinCap.io is an information source for market data about all digital assets. So it's a long list of all the digital assets ranked by size and importance. It shows data and it trades in real time, so you can sort of like feel the markets from that page. We just did some updates at the top, so you can see sort of the difference in relative size between Bitcoin versus everything else, and it's been really cool to watch how all these assets grow and change over time. So we have a mobile app, which is great. I mean, it's not to toot my own horn here, but it's probably the app that I use the most every day just to check on all the prices. It's the CoinCap mobile app for Android or iPhone. So download that. I promise you'll like it. It's really fun.
Yeah, it's great. I love seeing the real time, the little blinks of the reds.
Yeah, we call those the blinkies. And my team was a little skeptical when I told them that we had to have blinkies and that the blinkies were important. And it's sort of like a running joke now. But the blinkies are important. They show you how real and how real time and how current all this stuff is happening right in front of our eyes.
Yeah, I love the blinkies. More blinkies, everyone.
Yeah, more blinkies.
Yeah. So every show we have a magic word, and we usually ask our guests to pick one. The magic word, folks, is for the LTB network, which is the Let's Talk Bitcoin network. Adam B. Levine has invented an amazing concept where you can prove that you've listened to a show by putting in the magic word, and for that magic word you get some LTB coin, which is a token that trades in various places. And yeah, I guess, Eric, we need to come up with a phrase for this week's show.
I think blinkies might be appropriate.
Oh, look, there you go. Blinkies, folks. How would you spell that, Eric?
BLINKIES.
There you go. So blinkies. Is there anything else you'd like to add? Because we're getting to the end of the hour here. It's been a fascinating conversation with one of the granddaddies of tokens.
Yeah, I'm not sure if there's anything else to add other than it's always fun to chat and to see this industry growing and developing. So keep up the great work. We're big fans of Vaultoro, and you guys are doing a great service by meshing the cryptocurrency world and the tried and true metal world, which has always been the best form of value savings.
Thank you very much. And we've also got the Shifty button implemented, which is a really great tool. It means that anybody with any coin can convert that coin instantly to gold. And one thing that I really love about the service is that once you build, for the lack of a better word, a payment channel through ShapeShift, so you say, okay, this address here sends to my Vaultoro address, converts to Bitcoin, sends to the Vaultoro address, and places an order on the marketplace. Once you've set that up, you can directly mine to it. So if you're mining an altcoin, you can mine directly to gold, which is through the Shifty button. Is really cool. We've had some very excited people messaging me about that, saying that.
It's very cool and kind of poetic that people who are mining cryptocurrency can set up a few little automated tricks, and they are essentially mining gold.
Yeah.
Which is great. I mean, it's the people are mining gold with their computers, sort of metaphorically, but in reality, they're getting gold for their work. It's pretty cool.
It's very cool, isn't it? And without all the lung problems. So
that's right. That's right. Although I think some of the Chinese mines might have pretty crappy air quality, so the health issues may be still there, but they're not as bad as they were.
That's true. That's very, very true. Well, thank you very, very much, Erik Voorhees. Keep up the fantastic work. And folks, if you haven't checked out ShapeShift, well, I'm sure you already have, but if you haven't, do yourself a favor. If you need to convert to a token, if you've seen some great crowd sale on some product that you think you really want to support, there's the quickest way is through ShapeShift. It's super easy. There's no account needed, no rubbish. It's just straight in it. And I stand up and salute you in a peaceful way. I'd say salute. I was thinking, no, that's just too army. But I extend my hand of friendship and to you, Erik, and thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thanks, Josh. Really enjoyed it. Have a good one.
All right. Cheers.
Cheers.